In my head, you have held me in your arms. In my head, I've been witness to your charms 1,000 times. You have sung me a love song in my
Hello, and you are very welcome to this latest edition of the Attic Sessions. It's been a while, but we're delighted to be back, and we're looking forward to yet more series of conversations with some of the finest writers we know. My name is Nessa O'Mahony. Behind the camera is Peter Salisbury, and today we've brought our attic to the People's Park in Dunleary Glasthule, because not only do they make a deadly coffee and chai latte, it's also the favourite haunt of our guest, poet and memoirist Liam Carson. Liam, hi. Great to see you here.
Yeah, nice to be here, yeah.
Let me tell you a little about Liam before we get into conversation. He was born in 1962 and grew up in Belfast, where his father was a well-known writer, storyteller and specialist in both the Irish and Esperanto languages. And Liam, having studied in English and philosophy in UCD, worked then as a literary publicist and was founder and director of IMRAM, which is the Irish Language Literature Festival. We'll talk a bit about that in a while. He published a memoir in 2010 called Mother Lonely Field, which is here, which was actually shortlisted for the RSL Ondaatje Prize. And earlier this year, he published a debut volume of short poetry, Belfast Twilight, which was published by Salmon. So thanks so much for letting us come and check out your favourite writing haunt. Why is this place so special to you?
Well, myself and my partner, Niamh Lawler, moved here a while ago. We used to live in Blackrock, and then when we were able to buy a house, we came out here. And I started coming here, and I started coming here in periods where I wasn't feeling too good, actually, where I was kind of in a dark mood or whatever. And I found that by coming here, I got away from the computer. You sit here, it's like an extension of my soul at this stage, you know. I mean, you look at it here, you know, it's autumn now, the leaves are turning gold.
Yeah.
You get lots of starlings come down here during the day. At times they're not here at the minute, but they're very cheeky. They come up, they lead it out of your hand. The staff here are lovely. I just like watching the rhythms of life here.
Yeah.
You know, you have children, school kids coming in, older couples. There's a guy who sits over near the bandstand, and he plays jazz guitar in the afternoons. About 4 o'clock if you come here, and he'll be playing Autumn Leaves or some of my favourite things in a jazz guitar style. And I saw him yesterday, and he was serenading a little baby, you know.
Wow.
So you get lovely little things like that. You're beside the sea as well. You can see Howth. I just love this whole area, actually. You know, I go swimming as well over in Sandy Cove, which is very nice as well, you know, and you're beside Joyce's Tower there. And then you get people, you see familiar faces. Sometimes I'll bump into Kevin Gildee, the comedian here. We'll sit and we'll, you know, chew the fat together and talk about the dire state of the world and laugh about it or whatever. So it's an interesting place, and I just find I can relax here, and then I'm totally in the moment.
Yeah.
I forget about everything else. I quite often come here with books, a pile of books, quite often haiku books. Or I like literature which is full of images. So even if I can't write a haiku or something myself, when I'm here, I'm reading a book and I start finding haiku. Like, for example, the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, courtier in the Emperor's Palace in Kyoto thousands of years ago, who wrote these incredible memoirs, and they're just full of images.
Yeah.
Like every single line is a poem, every single line is a haiku. And then, so I'll steal from that, and then after a while I start writing my own.
Yeah.
You know, where does it all come from? You know, you steal it, you know.
But you grew up in Belfast, and I mean, do you feel resonances at all with that city, like here, or, you know, or does that just feel like a very separate place?
A thought that often comes into my mind and popped into my mind on the bus yesterday was actually where I live now. I live in a kind of a cul-de-sac. There's a school called the Holy Child Primary School, And my school in Belfast was the only child primary school, and I can see the Dublin mountains, and it's a suburb on the edge of the city. So I kind of live in a place that's not that dissimilar from where I grew up in Belfast. I lived on the outskirts of the city,
Yeah.
the Andersonstown Road, at the end of the Falls Road. I do miss certain things about Belfast. I miss the very dark sense of humour. I miss the argumentative nature of Belfast people. Like, quite often I sometimes find, when we're with friends in the south, and you're getting really head up in an argument or whatever, and start taking it personally. You're going, no, this is just the way we talk. In Belfast it's par for the course.
That's very Nordy of you.
You want to have a little bit of a thick skin, but it's a city with a soul. I miss the landscapes of Belfast at times.
Yeah.
Because it's a gritty city.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things that strikes me when I go up there is that, like Dublin, the hills, you can see at least one big hill.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of, and water is a kind of a constant presence in that city.
Yeah,
as well.
I need to be beside water.
Yeah.
I need to be beside the sea, and a city by the sea is my ideal place to
Yeah.
live in.
So growing up in Belfast, and I mentioned your dad, and in the memoir you write, beautifully about him and about your grandparents. How aware were you of the sort of the literary tradition, and were you already thinking of yourself as somebody who might further that, I suppose?
Well, it's about how you absorb literature. In my house, my father read very broadly. He loved people like Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, and he would have told us a lot of stories from the Irish tradition, stories about Cuchulainn, stories about St. Columcille. So he would tell me the stories at night in bed, and he would have a cigarette in his hand. The room would be dark, and the cigarette would be lit, and he would be making the movements of the story, with the cigarette glowing in the dark. Whenever I during the 1960s, I grew up in the 1960s, I read an awful lot of Marvel comics, which were just a doorway into a whole other universe, because they were fantastically written.
You were making comic books with your pals, weren't you?
I was drawing comics with two friends, Bernard and Gary, and we even got a duplicator. I was actually talking to Bernard recently. He was going, I think I have one or two of the samples we did with the duplicator, but they were terrible. But then the other thing was, there was my brother Kieran, obviously. In our house, it was a small house, but my mother and father finally got a bit of money, and they built a loft where Kieran was. So whenever Kieran was out during the day, I used to go up and rifle through his books, And he was sort of getting interested in poetry at the time. He was reading Kafafi, and one that's burnt in my mind is there was an American poetry magazine, American Poetry Review, and it had a picture of Frank O'Hara on the cover with his hand. There's an iconic photograph of Frank O'Hara, and there was an essay by Marjorie Perloff about Frank O'Hara. So I discovered Frank O'Hara, which is this beautiful demonic voice, basically.
So you were borrowing Kieran's poetry books?
Yeah. So I would, then started reading Frank O'Hara and stuff like that. Kieran used to sort of write, beautiful. He had these notebooks and beautiful copper plate writing, which sort of disintegrated over the years, as all of our handwriting did. But that was sort of, and then I started reading a lot of science fiction.
Yeah.
I loved American and British new wave science fiction, particularly people like Michael Moorcock, early Angela Carter, Ursula Le Guin, Harlan Ellison. I adored J.G. Ballard, because Ballard, you just went into a whole world of glittering language, really. It's completely and utterly, you have these catastrophic events taking place, like the entire world being flooded, or the entire world drying up. It's a sort of climate fiction before the issue even existed, really.
So did you try your hand at fiction then at that point?
I used to. One of the other things I used to love was Conan the Barbarian, by Robert E. Howard, which I discovered through the Marvel comics.
Yeah.
And I kind of loved Robert E. Howard. He was an incredibly energetic writer, but it was this sort of, Conan's wandering through these sort of decaying civilizations and lost languages and sorcerers and monsters and all the rest of it. So I tried to write fiction in his style when I was about 15. My dream was to be a pulp writer, like the guys that wrote, like Edgar Rice Burroughs or Maxwell Grant, who created The Shadow, and they would sort of be sitting at 3 o'clock in the morning with a typewriter, in a room in New York, that kind of romantic idea of the pulp writer. That's what I wanted to be, was a pulp writer, actually.
So did UCD cancel that dream, or what happened to it?
Well, I went to UCD. I studied literature. I kind of misspent my time in UCD. You could say I spent more time in the bar.
Yeah. Which was the most popular bar in Ireland. It had the biggest turnover.
It was very extremely popular for various reasons.
Yeah.
And so I used to spend a lot of time in the bar or in the restaurant, just talking to people. I ran the Contemporary Music Society.
Oh, okay. Because I think you were actually 2 years ahead of me.
Yeah, I was involved in student union politics in the first year. But to be what was I reading whenever I was in college? I wasn't really reading much that was on the course. I started reading people like Ray Carver and Jane Ann Phillips. I would have liked writers like that. I always had a thing for William Blake. I still read William Blake and all the rest of it. The big thing for me was music, really, at that era. It was Joy Division, seeing New Order live, the early Simple Minds.
So were you beginning to put on shows then, or?
Yeah, I did. I staged a few shows, so yeah, but I always had that ability,
Yeah. The impresario stream.
Yeah, I kind of like doing that. I like being an impresario. It's a nice word, actually. Tristan Rosenstock said that to me, you're an impresario in the Gaeilge, which I was very chuffed by, actually.
Incredibly important. I mean, the memoir was the first, if I'm right, the memoir was the first book.
Yeah, and the way it came about was sort of quite odd, actually, because I had a contract to write a completely different book. Wolfhound Press came to me, and Siobhan and Seamus said, you've got a book and what do you want to write about?
Siobhan Campbell and Seamus Cashman.
Yeah, and what I wanted to write at the time was a book about music. I was obsessed with the idea of music being a trigger to memory, and I had all these old records that I had and letters from my friends talking about music and concerts and all that kind of stuff. And it was going to be called Vinyl Junkie because I was obsessed with the idea of vinyl being superior, and I wrote a whole piece about, the crackle of the record going up the hairs on your arm as you put the needle down on the record, and then a memory is triggered. And I was obsessed with the song Tangled Up in Blue by Bob Dylan because it's an entire novel in verse. So I I was writing pieces about that song. I've written a lot of essays over the years about that song. Because there's an entire universe, and it's written in very plain language, and people just do not get the amount of references to things that are going on in that song. There's references to Rambo, he steals a line from Baudelaire, he steals lines from soul songs, he steals lines from Kerouac, he steals lines from millions of different sources, and people think that's a really, really simple song. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to use songs, and then I related that to my own experience, because the way I look at that song is that it's everybody's story. Any great pieces of art is going to be your own story as well as the writer's story, I think. So
it morphed away from a focus on music and more into...
Yeah, what happened was that just... It didn't happen, and then Wolfhound got taken over by another company, and then in the meantime I was working with Lilliput Press, and I met Marcia Swan there, young American woman, and she was working as an editor with Lilliput Press. She formed her own company, Hag's Head. She goes, write that book, Liam. She goes, I want a manuscript from you by the 31st of October this year. If you haven't got it from me on that day, forget about it. I'll never talk to you again. And at that stage, I was getting interested in the Irish language, and I'd written a few essays about my upbringing and about the Irish language and about literature in Irish, because I discovered literature in Irish around about that time.
Yeah, but you weren't educated through Irish, were you?
No, I went to a Christian Brothers Grammar School, and Irish was one of the subjects taught at the school. And
But you would have heard it at home.
Yeah, I was brought up speaking Irish. I didn't speak English until I went to primary school. I didn't speak a word of English until I went to primary school. Really, I would have gone to the Gael talk whenever I was at school as well. I went to Guy quite a few times. And that's the kind of Irish that's sort of mostly fixed in my head, is Guy Dore Irish, because that's what my father and mother spoke. Belfast Irish is basically a version of Guy Dore Irish kind of thing with a Belfast accent.
Well, I think, the memoir is an extraordinarily rich account, both of your growing up, but also the sort of the background, like your amazing portraits of your grandparents, your dad, just what life was like. And I think you had found a piece in there to read, or a couple of pieces.
Yeah, this is about my father. My father was a postman, which is actually the most important thing to note about him. Because he was a postman, he used to wander all around the city, and he knew every single street in the city by heart. He had songs and mnemonics that he used to remember his postal routes, and he knew people all across the city as a result of this.
I think you mentioned bumping into Ian.
Oh, he bumps into Ian Paisley at one stage, and Paisley knocks his bag off his shoulder, and the letters around the street, and Paisley helped my dad to pick up the letters and apologise.
man.
Apologise to proof. Yeah, you think that's the weird thing about Paisley. He could be a decent man actually as well, you know. But you know, anyway, my father, because he worked for the post office, used to unload the mail from the trains in York Street Station. The old York Street Station is gone, and it's about that. Saturday nights, the dad took Brandon and myself to York Street Station, down by the docks. Here the trains arrived from the Larne boat, loaded with mail from England, Scotland, Wales, beyond. We'd help my father carry postbags to the Royal Mail vans. In the 1970s, York Street Station was still an old world place, a final vestige of Victorian Belfast. In the bar, aged wood panelling, stained glass windows, old men would down pints of Guinness and scan the pages of Ireland's Saturday Night and the Belfast Telegraph. We drank cokes and ate crisps. The dad would have a smoke and a pint. Outside the ferries lay docked along Donegal Quay, the cranes looming over the Lagan. I remember on Claphollis, the gloaming, the evening turning to nightfall in Belfast. Huge clouds of starlings would spiral around the river's bridges, sweeping down to the water's surface, swooping under their arches, and then hurtling up again. Above Donegal Square, pigeons flocked to the parapets of the City Hall and the department stores of Royal Avenue, a cacophony of bird screech rising above the dim roar of evening traffic. I remember one blazing Saturday afternoon in July. I'm walking with my father down the few remaining streets of Belfast sailor town. The da is sweating. We go into York Street Station to cool down. By the ticket office there is a glass case, and inside it there is a model of an old steam train. Its side is cut open, exposing the intricate workings of the engine. My father gives me an old penny to put in the slot. The pistons jerk into action. The wheels turn. Magic, hypnotic. I am entranced.
Beautiful. And there are those starlings again. There seem to be sort of recurring
Yeah, I love them, yeah.
motifs. Did it feel when you had done that, when you'd written that memoir, that it was in a way clearing your space to try other types of writing?
Yes, no, once I got the book written, I went, well, at last I've written the bloody book, you know, and I should have done this a long time ago.
Did it feel like a professional pressure, like because the big brother was a poet?
Once I was given the deadline to do this, you see, all the material was there. That's what Marcia said to me. She goes, it's all there. You've written it all already. You just have to
organise it
and put it all together, which is precisely what I did. And then in the process of doing that, I started writing in new pieces and shifting it about, you know. And then the big thing about writing that book was one of the books my bird Kieran used to have up in the loft was An Experiment in Time. It was a very strange book. It was very fashionable in the 1930s by a guy called J.W. Dunn, which posited that all time exists simultaneously. You know, that yesterday exists still in another dimension, that we are living inside all these different dimensions.
J.W. Dunn.
Yeah. So I wrote a lot of the book in the historic present tense. So I wanted the book to feel like you are in this moment that is happening in the book right now. You know, a lot of people said to me, God, you've got an astonishing memory to remember all this. I don't actually have an astonishing memory. I have a very poor memory. But what I do have are images that are really planted deeply in my brain of certain things. And then you write it, you know, is it what happened or is it not? I don't know. But the truth is there.
Yeah, it's the closest representation you can. Same way as in Angela's Ashes, like, you know, all of that dialogue could not possibly have been remembered by the writer like several decades later. But
totally.
Something like that.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
There's some poetry in the book. Now, the first time I ever wrote a poem, it was when I started immersing myself in the Irish language again. I sat down one night and I just remembered my mother in the nursing home, and the one thing she used to say again and again, it was "Bob go na Walya, I want to go home."
Yeah.
And she's in the nursing home. So I just wrote down "Bob go na Walya," and then within 5 minutes I'd written an entire poem about my mother in a nursing home, and that was in Irish. And then another one was I started thinking about my father. A lot of the book is about dreams as well. It was myself and my father and my brother Kieran, the three of us, all vivid dreamers.
Yeah.
You know, we go into other dimensions in our
Yeah,
dreams.
I remember during COVID you were posting some of those dreams on,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Facebook.
yeah. And I've got one here with me, which maybe Reid will see.
Yeah.
But
you moved towards Eastern forms. You moved towards haiku and
yeah, I was in Japan back in about 2001 or so, and I was near Tokyo when I went to Kamakura where the great Buddha is, and I visited Kyoto, and I bought a book, a guide to writing haiku, you know, that was published in English, published by Tuttle, who published a lot of Japanese stuff in English. No, that's sort. And then I forgot about it.
yeah.
And then I was on holiday with my partner Neve in Edinburgh. I was going over to see a friend of mine, Jackie Leavin, the singer. Come Mother Lonely Field comes from Jackie Leavin, the singer, a friend of mine, who's very sadly gone there. But we were over to see Jackie, and we went into the art museum in Edinburgh, and I bought a little book called Atoms of Delight, which was a collection of short form and haiku Scottish poets. It was stunning stuff. And then once I started doing Imram, I got to know Gabriel Rosenstock, and I worked on doing a collection of Jack Kerouac's haiku translated into Irish by Gabriel. So eventually I started experimenting with the form. Myself and Neve used to text each other, you know, it was all 575, and then I started just realizing, no, it's not about 575, it's about something else, and Gabriel would be explaining that to me, that it's about something that's happening now.
Yeah.
And you take the ego out,
Yeah.
and it's about how using all your senses. And
So that taking the ego out, because I remember Maeve O'Sullivan trying to explain to me what haiku was and how what I thought haiku was wasn't. And I realised that as a writer, I'm not necessarily sure I would ever want to take my ego out.
yeah, well, you do and you don't, you see. You know, the way Gabriel puts it is that if you're writing a good haiku, what you're seeing and what is happening inside your consciousness at the same time are correlating, that it's a form of synchronicity, what Carl Jung would call synchronicity. In other words, it's about letting your mind sort of go where you're not thinking, and then suddenly you start realizing what things are, and you're trying to describe that. And if it's a good haiku, there is emotion in it. And also as well, you can break the rules, and Gabriel goes too far with that, I think, sometimes, because you read a lot of haiku by Baishan, you know, he's very clearly there, you know, so it's, I don't get too head up on the rights and wrongs, or there are all sorts of different schools of thought about what a haiku is and what a haiku is not, you know.
Yeah, but in Belfast Twilight, it's haiku, it's senru.
Senri as well. I use the term senri because some of them are not about nature at all.
So they're urban based.
They're urban based,
Okay.
because, you know, they're very obviously autobiographical as well. The Belfast ones were not necessarily. Some of them were written in Belfast at the time. There are whole sequences which are about a particular time in Belfast where I simply just went into the zone of where they happened, and as if I was looking at them, and wrote them down. So Gabriel, you know, he wrote a review there recently of the book, and he was sort of saying that, you know, people say a haiku can only be a true haiku if it is literally written now, and he goes, yeah, but if it's happening now inside your consciousness, it's not.
Yeah.
You know, the past still exists.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And another reviewer, this is Billy Mills, which I read, he places you, he says, in a distinctly Irish tradition, and not only just the title, but also the he feels there are sort of links to other Irish language poetry. So, did that resonate?
I don't entirely agree with that, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a few people sort of said, you know, because, you know, the Twilight is a sort of reference to the Celtic Twilight, or you know, is it like the early Irish lyric? You know, maybe they're the early Irish, you know, the Blackbird of Belfast Law, of course, you know, and you know, would be. The poet Rody Gorman recently, he's done a version of Sweeney's Madness where he uses haiku by Santoka Taneda translated into Irish, and then there's also translations of Irish, you know, early Irish lyrics, and they're going in between languages and stuff, you know. So I think there are other people who are doing that more than I am. Would it more for me? It's more I like the concision of haiku, and it's not just haiku. I love short form writers like Gustave Sauban, French writer who writes very pared back poetry. There's Pierre Chapuis, a Swiss poet, who again writes highly condensed poetry. I'm reading a Galician writer at the minute, Uccio Novonareya, who wrote a whole series of poems about the uplands, the mountains in Galicia, and he was very tuned into the short form poem as well. So it's really to do. I just sort of connected to it in a particular way, the idea of brevity.
Yeah.
And went, that's how I can do it, that's how I can write poetry. I mean, I have been trying to write other kind of forms of poetry. What will happen with them, I don't know, but I've cracked this one in a way, and it's something that I can develop and build on.
So when it came to then organising it into a book, like, because, the classic advice to the long form poet is, 40 to 50 of your best in as good thematic order as you can. How do you wrangle short poems into a book?
Well, as it happened, a lot of them are sequences, and they were written as sequences. I find a lot of the time whenever I do write good haiku, I've gone into a particular mood. I love rainy days, for example, and I mean, I have a sequence where I was on a tram going through the centre of Dublin, and it was absolutely bucketing rain, and the rain's running down the waters, and I just went into a particular mood, started writing about what I saw as I was on the tram and as I get off the tram and walk around the city. So, and then suddenly I've got 20 haiku about that day. Another sequence, I was on a train with my daughter Ethna. She was going to do an audition for a musical show in Belfast. We were getting the train. It was raining, dark, and then it was bright south of the border. And then as we got more north, there's a loyalist saying, "We will never forsake the blue skies of Ulster for grey skies of an Irish Republic." It's the other way around usually. But anyway, we had to get off the train because there was a body on the line. And then we got a bus going through all these back roads in County Down as we were approaching Belfast. So I just wrote a whole series of haiku on that, And it was the road, I called that sequence the Road to the North, which of course is referring to Basho, the road to the north. There are a few little allusions in there to Heaney, which weren't actually intentional. But as I wrote it down, I went, oh yeah, right, that's Heaney, but anyway.
Does it feel like it's impossible to avoid influences as massive as Heaney or Longley or Mahon or any of the great Ulster poets?
Of those, I think Mahon's The Snow Party is an absolutely beautiful poem, and he really understood the haiku form. They're not the people that really influenced me, to be honest. It was more Japanese and American writers. A writer I've discovered recently who I really love is Friederike Mayrocker, the Austrian poet. Okay. It's completely different from haiku. Short form poetry was experimental, just torrents of language, and language cut up and reorganized. But what she is imagist. I love the idea of imagining,
which goes back to Carlos Williams.
I love William Carlos.
Ezra Pound, if we're allowed to mention him.
The brevity or the tersity of Emily Dickinson as well. So there's that whole kind of tradition. But I also like poetry that comes out in torrents. And I'm thinking of experimenting with that at some point. A book of litanies maybe. A poet who I think doesn't get the credit she deserves is Fran Locke.
Oh yeah.
I just discovered recently, she was shortlisted with the T. Eliot Prize, but she seems to have been completely ignored by the wider world of poetry.
It's funny how
and she's incredible.
People just go under radars for whatever reason.
And she writes about, she comes from a traveller Irish background. She's sort of between Ireland and London, and she's she writes these poems where she takes on the persona of the hyena, and she's writing about working class experience. She's talking about being queer. She's talking about an urban experience. The language just comes out in torrents, and again there are images image after image after image after image after image. Incredibly imaginative, incredibly powerful, full of music, and I would like to do something like that maybe at some point.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear some of your own poems at this point, some of the haiku, the sequences.
Okay, well, I mentioned Road to the North, so which starts the book. The train hurtling north, a swirl of ravens, The train hurtling north, blood on the tracks. The train hurtling north, dark skies of Ulster. Ruined cottage, below its rusted roof, door into the dark. Road to the north, a line of bare trees on a hillside. Road to the north, circus trucks abandoned in a farmyard. Road to the north, the weight of ivy on a ruined cottage. Road to the north, a mansion gazing on a flooded field. Road to the north, a sign pointing to Black Skull.
Beautiful.
And this is a sequence about my mother. I always think of my mother at this time of the year. She was born in October and she died in deep winter up in the glens of Antrim. This is Mother in Winter. Mother in winter, praying by her mother's photo, a candle flickers. Deep winter, threading needles for my mother, the fire glows. Winter night, making tea for mother, the kettles whistle. The coldest winter, mother knits ganties for toy soldiers. Crisp banknotes in mother's wrinkled hand, Christmas Eve. Winter night, click of knitting needles, my mother prays. Swifts in a blue sky, mother scurrying out the door, so long ago. Sunday afternoon rain, mother walks on and on and on. Winter winds, waiting for mother's return. Night falls. Nursing home. Mother pleads to go home. Deep winter. Winter night. Around my dying mother, candles flicker. 4 coffins carried out of the nursing home. Winter winds. Winter winds on the mountainside. Parents' grave. Old wardrobe, after all these years, the smell of mother. This is a little sequence written about Japan. The Buddha's arms, child's grave, a toy rabbit resting in the Buddha's arms. So bright the geisha on the streets of Kyoto, roiling rain clouds. Deep in the woods, rain keeps falling. A temple. Seeing as we're in Dunleary,
Yes, indeed.
at the People's Park, we should really read a sequence. This is one I wrote on Good Friday this year. Good Friday 2025, People's Park, Dunleary. Wet blackness of an oak's branches, Good Friday. Barely a sinner in the pouring rain, Good Friday. Black tea and the silent radio, Good Friday. Cherry blossom soaked into a pathway, Good Friday. Laughter from a shuttered cafe, vinegar on Christ's lips. The cross of its black wings crow in rain. The silence of leaves underwater, Christ's head falls. Christ's last breath in the pouring rain, starlings rise. And maybe a sequence in Irish.
Yes, please.
Shedin an Rich. Madu leis hien. A grílar na hinse. Shedin an Rich. Plescu on chanwala lia. Scornless corkra. Camog an iske. Door chu a wallach an nurchadas na hoan. Londu bui a mas na gran. Shedin an Rich. Far marav a idol in a tust. Shedin an Rich. And I like islands as well, and this is about being on Inishmore in the Arons. Island haiku. Setting sun in the horse's brown eye, so soft his nose. Sunset on the lake, drone of a bee going home. Lowing of cows at sunset, so still the lake. A fly walks down the horse's face, twilight. Hooks for teacups on the empty dresser, deserted lighthouse. Spiral staircase, rusting in darkness, old lighthouse. Lucky star bar on a cracked window, plastic flowers fade. On the path to a holy well, a white butterfly. So bright by the grey stone wall, alpine, strawberry. Black back of a broken currach island fields.
Fantastic. And it was great to hear the Irish language there, and it reminded me that I wanted to ask you before we finish this conversation to talk a bit about Imran, because I've been lucky enough to have been in one of the shows with you. Can't remember how long ago, 8 or 9 years ago, and it was this extraordinary combination of talents, both visual and auditory. I think Colin McAnamara was the musician.
That's right.
And Margaret Lonergan doing these wonderful sort of visual things. And it seems pretty unique in terms of Irish performance, and they feel almost like extravaganzas. How did they develop?
Well, when I first founded Imran back in 2004, I wanted it to be something that was dynamic. I realised that there wasn't a platform for Irish language writers, that very little was being done for them. If you had an Irish language writer at a festival, you would have the usual suspects, as I called them at the time. Who's an Irish language poet? Well, we'll have Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill. Nuala is brilliant, and of course she should do theirs to be there, but they didn't seem to be aware of all the other writers that were writing in the Irish language, like Michael O'Conneilla, who's writing strange, surreal novels, Daithí O'Murray, who hardly anybody was reading at the time, who would have theme books. One would be Cuggies, who would have a series of stories just about war.
Yeah.
And now in that case, what I did was, for some reason, I thought it'd be good to have a dancer. So I got in touch with Fergus O'Crochur, the choreographer and a dancer who has beautiful Irish, and I asked him to create a show based on stories about war by Daithí. So I had Daithí sitting in an armchair reading the stories, and then there were images on the screen, and then Fergus dancing. But from the very start, I decided we would have music and poetry or prose or whatever on the stage together. So first year I would have had, there was Galvian Junction, a rhythm and blues band, and I had some poets. I had Garage McLaughlin was reading from his book Rakish Paddy Blues with a piper, because the book was about the piping tradition amongst travellers. And then the next year that developed a bit into what was called the Gaelic Jazz Project. And I went, I got to know Sean McErlean, the saxophone player and composer, and he assembled a jazz band for me, and I invited Louis Dupuy, Darina Nicanedge, and Garage McLaughlin again to perform poetry with a jazz band. And then I met a woman called Mary Scholes, and I got her to create images that were based on typography and based on stories by Daithí O'Murray. So they were projected on the screen, which had nothing to do with the poetry that was being that was being read. And that was in the Boom Boom Room in Conway's Bar, which is now sadly closed for a long time, the famous Brown Envelope pub. And we used to have great shows up there. And then we would do things like, there was Tony Mackin on accordion and Steve Cooney on guitar, and we'd have them on with poets and stuff, The big breaks, and then it occurred to me to have themes as well.
Yeah.
So at one stage I went, forgotten sounds, what sounds do you not hear anymore? And it would be sounds like the crackle of static on the television as you turned it on. Then I spoke to Darina Grief, and she goes, yeah, what about an old typewriter? Not just a typewriter. She picked a clo typewriter, an Irish language clo typewriter, because such a thing existed whenever you had the clo. Yeah. So she wrote a beautiful poem, and then I spoke to Fergus Kelly, who's an amazing experimental musician and sound sculptor. So he recorded all these different sounds, and then the poets were reading the sounds. We did a shadow puppet version, my partner Niamh Lawler, of Kafka's stories, done as shadow puppet. The big breakthrough in terms of the musical shows. Well, the first one was Dylan, because I'm obsessed with Bob Dylan, you know, his most high Bobness. And so I decided to ask Gabriel Rosenstock and Colin Bretnock to translate Dylan. Gabriel asked me to send him a song. I sent him Shelter from the Storm. It came back within 20 minutes. I was Vesti on Sturm, and it was beautiful. It was brilliant. It was astounding. I asked Liam O'Malley to be the singer, and Keeving from the reggae band Breg in Belfast. And I had Steve Cooney producing, you know, put together a band. And the first time we did, we just had the lyrics on a bed sheet on on a wall. It was really simple. And then Margaret, who's a really good friend of mine, was going, I could do this, you know. So the next time we did it, she went and started sourcing all sorts of crazy images. I mean, you take a song like Joker Man, which was the first song in the performance, it's exploding with images, you know, taken from the tarot, taken from the Bible, taken from Sumerian mythology, taken from every possible mythology you can think of. So she sourced all these images, and then, you know, Blake's paintings and all the rest of it. So you get a totally immersive experience. And the other wonderful thing about it was people would come up to me after the concert because they could see the lyrics and going, I didn't realise I had so much Irish. And people would be singing like a Rolling Stone in Irish. Yeah. At the end of the night. So it's an amazing device to get publicity for ourselves as well.
But also sort of the fact that audiences weren't necessarily Irish language speakers, but they could still come and engage.
I was trying to look at things through the lens of myself, because even though I was brought up speaking Irish, I didn't really read much in Irish. You know, my father would have had a lot of old books by Thomas O'Crichen and Moira and Shossil McGreena and Peg and Glasgow Island people and all the rest of it. You know, wonderful books. You know, but at the time when I was 16, I wasn't interested in them. What happened was I discovered Irish literature when I was in language literature whenever I was up in Donegal. I went into a bookshop in Aegis-Gael. I bought books by Cathal O'Sharkey and Michael O'Connell and stuff, and I started reading the stuff, and I thought, my God, this stuff is like incredibly modern and cutting edge, you know. But then there is a wonderful thing in the Irish language as well of like really drawing on tradition of a huge body of culture and language and literature and song that's still very much alive. You've got people like Ethne Galchor, who's up in Donegal, she brought out an amazing book about a year ago on Kraken Agus Luach, you know, which is a version of the Selkie, or you know, the seal transforming into a woman's story. And she's doing amazing stuff with that material. And we had a performance at Imram last year where she just blew everybody away. But she is teaching children in Donegal that. And amongst teenagers and young people in their 20s, storytelling has become incredibly fashionable again, and in Irish, you know.
Yeah. So do you feel that, like, you know, if 20 years ago you had the sense that there was a sort of an invisibility around Irish language arts that Imram was going to address, is that still an issue, do you think?
It's still an issue, but it is less so.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit more awareness, and I think Imram helped with that.
Yeah.
Because people were able to come to us and go, we'd like to do an Irish language event, you know, can you give us some advice? Or I would go, if you have X amount of money, we can bring the show that we have already created to you. So we have toured stuff as well, you know, but it's an ongoing voyage, you know, and you know, luckily enough now I have somebody working with me, Majella, you know, and she's coming up with ideas that I wouldn't necessarily have. Like, I've never been interested in sport, but this year we're going to have a show about Michael McCarthy, the you know, who everybody in Ireland loved. You know, didn't matter if you were into GAA or not, you know.
Kerry people
you know, it's called Bard in the Park, you know, so he was the bard, he was the poet of Gaelic sport. So we're going to have a wonderful show created by my colleague Majella. And she's got a few other ideas and stuff like that. And then there's a younger generation come up. There's a lot of spoken word poetry now which didn't exist. You have Seamus Barrow Sullivan, you have Kieran EA, you have other people, you have the kneecap phenomenon as well, all of which have shown that the language has an amazing degree of flexibility and
capability,
despite all
evolving.
efforts by various sections of society to obliterate it, it exists. You know? Hope lies in the prose, and that's where it's coming from in a large extent. It's not coming from the academy.
Well, that's where the life is. It's coming from the
people on the streets.
That's where the life is. Well, I mean, it's been a pleasure hearing you talk about this, and I think a lot of the time when people are so active as well, I suppose I would call you a literary citizen in that you've done so much for other writers, to support other writers. It can be easy for your own kind of work to become the invisible thing behind all that. So it was great to get a chance to talk to you today. Maybe you might just finish off with just one little, I know I didn't tell you, you might do that, but maybe...
Okay, you mentioned lockdown. I wrote a lot of stuff during lockdown and the mad dreaming and all the rest of it. No, I don't know what I'm going to do with this material. There's 400 pages of it, and I've discovered that people don't really want to read about lockdown because you know yourself, you look at a book blurb and you see COVID mentioned, no, I'll give that a miss. People want to forget about it, which is fair enough, you know. But I did enter into strange realms whenever that whole experience happened, which I think a lot of people did, and this is one of the dreams, and it's not...
It is what it is.
The year of the owl and the starlings of the solstice. In this year of the owl, there has been much death, but in its nighttime call, we also find beauty. It is the solstice, the day of the sun's standing still. I arrive at my childhood home in the pre-dawn light of a Belfast morning. Ethna is with me. My father opens the door and meets my daughter for the first time in this place and time of things that never were and never will be. My father gets his overcoat and hat, and we board a Falls Road trolleybus. The electric sparks from the overhead cables light up the dark, rain-soaked streets. At Kennedy Way, the trolleybus swings right, then heads down the motorway past Motown Cemetery. Its headlights are reflected off the marble headstones, like flash photographs being taken.
Ooh.
I fancy the dead are collecting snapshots of those who have outlived them. We then swing up the Springfield Road and alight at the police barracks. It's sometime in the late 1960s. It was not one of those evenings after the men's confraternity when my father would take me to visit relatives in Kashmere Road. And so he wants Ethna to meet them, Sadie and Teenie, Norman Shepherd doing a jigsaw. His daughter Maureen is my godmother. My father thinks she'll be thrilled to meet Ethna. We'll have tea, lemonade and biscuits. The wood-bound smoke will waft itself around my father as he speaks. We pass Clonard Monastery, and I think of the meaning of its name in Irish, Clúin Ard, the high meadow. In the blink of an eye, beauteous fields rise before me, high meadows rising from the city's back streets to the slopes of the Black Mountain. It is now a blazing summer's day. There are only a few wispy white clouds in an azure sky. There are shimmering ponds and lakes to either side of us. 7 swans circle one lake. They might be the children of Lear, says my father. Just then a monk runs past us. We look up to the sky and see a vast murmuration of starlings. We watch the rise and fall of their pulsating patterns of flight. We see and hear the monk blow a whistle, and the starlings all freeze in mid-air. We can see the electric green sheen of 1,000 bellies. As the monk reaches the shores of a lake, he blows his whistle a second time. The starlings explode into motion once again. We see the swans heading out to sea. There is the wild honking of geese. There is a symphony of birdsong. I see the starlings' bellies quivering with life. And as my father takes my daughter's hand for the first time ever, my own belly quivers and bursts open to emit 1,000 beams of joyous light.
Gorgeous, gorgeous, Liam, and that wonderful thing that dreams do of uniting people who may not have met in life, but they meet in dreams. And when you were reading that, there was a starling that may not have been in the shot.
The starlings,
there was a starling on the table.
The starlings were there, and there was a breeze of wind, and the spirits are with us.
They are. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a sheer delight to talk to you, as we knew it would be. And thanks for being in our revivified attic sessions.
Wake is so great.
And thank you very much for watching. We will hopefully be back again with you sometime soon. In the meantime, take care.
Yes, I know that I'm just a dreamer. I dream 'cause it's the closest I'll ever get to you.